something that's come to a lot of people's attention, this notion of telepathy and communicating on, I guess, a non-localized plane of consciousness. Many of us were, kind of captivated by the telepathy tapes and, arguably a lot of anecdotal reports and a lot of, questions as well about the use of facilitated communication, which I usually like to set aside since there's a lot of complexity and controversy surrounding facilitated communication. But suffice it to say, there are many ways that people who are non-speaking can communicate at various levels of cognitive functioning. And so we know that that exists, but what is your take on this notion that one of the untapped abilities that many of us have involve accessing information that exists in a plane that apparently we can learn to access, but most of us don't on a daily basis?
Well, I think it's also something that we believe, grow up starting to believe that it's not possible. For example, I have that, with children and friends, and that where, you text them and they know, right? That you said, well, I was just thinking of you, or they will call you and you were thinking of them. And Rupert Sheldrake, popularized that in his book. I think was it 7 Experiments That Will Change the World, or something like that, where he talks about the common knowing that you know who will call you, and the pets know when you're coming home. And we all come across that phenomenon. We cannot deny it. Or when somebody's looking at you directly, or even through the camera, through the surveillance camera, and you would know. So that's why they put a person, in surveillance room in some places, because there is an eye perception rather than just cameras that are capturing everything anyway, and now can be detected automatically. So I personally experienced that. I cannot deny it. I have that, intuition and knowing so many times that it's just impossible to not look. I have not worked with people who are non-speakers, but I'm delighted that, Kai Dickens has, I love her quote that she put on the website is assume competence. And I think it's such a strong thing to come in, like to have it in our vocabulary, that wherever you go in, like when you go in to talk to children, assume competence, or you go into the shop, you are talking to anyone, just assume competence. You just have no idea where people come from, what their walk of life is. And you just don't know. Maybe they are telepathic, equally so. And what I found very interesting, that people's response when they realize that other people can read the mind, especially children and adults like non-speakers, it's frightening for some people, that they feel that, that our mind will be read. And I think that's such a beautiful wake-up call for all of us to start clearing that space, of whatever comes into our perception. I grew up with almost becoming, I wanted to level with the ground if I would think a bad thought, because I would feel as if somebody ever heard what I think right now. I just don't want to exist at all. So for me, I don't know where that come from, but for me, a culture of thought, that's how I termed it for me, was so important. And I knew somewhere inside that if I think bad, I would never have any abilities whatsoever. Because if I, with my mind, can imagine something and it could come true, and if that's what Eastern masters, are thinking and they're able to make it true, what if I think something bad, and I inflict it on somebody else? So somewhere very early on in this very preteen, martial art, it really dawned on me that we have a power of thought, and that we can change our environment, affect other people just by thinking, or even breathing. If we breathe a certain way, we can puncture somebody's, internal organs by, directing this chi in a certain way and throwing them across the room, no matter what your size is. And I just thought, if we've got this capacity, we have to harness it. So I grew up with that awareness that it's possible. And I wanted to go to science to pursue that, but I was not allowed to touch it, if you wish. But what I'm seeing is that people who do work in extreme environments, and people who I come across who work in the military, they thrive with that ability, and they're known for that. People will respect and follow their advice because there is no other intuitive perception. Or like I know now several cases from mothers that intuited something, and they heard the baby say something, and they would run and then find it that the dog, which was safe, but dragged the baby where the baby didn't want it to be, on the carpet, for example. So these like little intuitions. So when you wake up in the night and, you come to the baby and you came just on time, or, having that urge in the night, and you would wake up at the same time when the baby, needed assistance or something like that. I don't know where that comes from, but I've experienced that. So I think it's beautiful that we're touching that. But what I'm hoping that this telepathy tapes is actually changing us as human beings and making us consider what we think in the first place, what we think every day. Let us go down with embarrassment of what we do think, and let that be our, morning thought. What if somebody is reading my thoughts? What if, somebody can act, or something will change given my thoughts?
Yeah, I think a follow-up question is what can change, right? If we're paying attention to those kinds of thoughts. We've, spoken to Bruce Lipton and Joe Dispenza, and, people who really believe that, manifesting, right? Positive affirmations, that those things are not just lip service, that they can actually change the physiology, right, of our bodies. So by the same token, if we can imagine ourselves into more health, more openness, more positivity, it would absolutely follow that thinking negatively can spiral us into pain, discomfort, suffering, and maybe even disease.
Yeah, so the Dr. Lipton talking about the environment, affecting the cells. And I think that's a beautiful example. And I think everyone can imagine when we are in a setting, when we're in a meeting and somebody comes in and there's an air about them. And the room either like goes into silence because you feel, I don't know, the tremor that something, will happen, or somebody comes in and it's just like a light, like the mood lifts and suddenly people exhale and relax. And we know the Heart Math Institute as well. They look into heart brain coherence, and by breathing and also aligning with, which is in a way like biofeedback, they say that they could measure how far the field extends, and that we bounce almost into each other and cross these bubbles of our electromagnetic field, which we do know because in medicine we use magnetic measuring of, our brain and heart. So it's not far off to say that how we feel affects other people. And it's just like when you come in and the pet meets you, or a child runs into your arms, or a partner or somebody you deeply respect smiles, and your day has changes, and suddenly everything goes well. So where does that come from? Is that because of our state, or is that the environment responding to us? And I certainly know that when I come in, and if I don't change my attitude, the day will go very differently. So, whatever that may be, whether it's, an energetic effect, or my, human doing and being, and attitude in terms of our perception. So even on physiology level, we understand if we worry, we can't perceive things. So which means we won't notice nice things or good things that could change us. And also we have something called selective perception, which is, kind of the science touches all of this, right? We can almost like circle around it, but we can't explain it. And our selective attention, that famous experiment of the person in a monkey suit, a gorilla suit, coming across the screen, and people are playing, passing basketball in white t-shirts. And if we are focusing on how many times the ball was passed between people in white t-shirts, nobody sees somebody coming to the middle of the screen and then walking past. And that is selective attention. So what else are we not seeing? So, and that's also interesting. So I think I'm not trying to trail back from our extrasensory perception and intuition. I'm just saying that we are only starting to pick up with science, and we should maintain curiosity to keep going. And like, Dispenza, Joe Dispenza, has thousands of examples, happening right there, in a regular, regular intervals, if you wish, during the events when people, they needed that moment of belief and that moment of clarity and relaxation. And we know if we just go for a walk, the problem solves in our head. If as soon as we let go, the opportunity opens, the perceptual capacity, be it intuition, better logic, our better oxygenation and clarity. But to me, it's dropping that state, whatever that is, to allow the perception to be better, be it physiological or intuitive, doesn't matter. The whole point is fine-tuning. Where do you feel it? And the idea is to notice, to sort of almost be realistic in the expectation. So not in our own exploration and investigation to say, oh, I actually knew that a split second before. So let me write it down so that my brain that's been trained scientifically not to consider this as a possibility, I actually did know. It didn't happen after. It happened before. And by extending that time and allowing our brain to walk that path, or our mind to be convinced more often, we allow that possibility that we have that ability.
What is coincidence? Because you've mentioned it, a few times in different ways. Synchronicity, can there sometimes just be coincidence? And it could just be a different worldview. I've definitely had instances. It happened just yesterday, Jonathan. I was thinking about your son, and literally the next second you said, my son is calling, let me call you right back. And I said to my son, who was in the room, I was just thinking about Jonathan's son, and he called, and my son said to me, no, I was thinking about his son. And I thought, what is happening? So my son was saying that he and I shared a thought about Jonathan's son, and then Jonathan's son called.
And the question is, did you share a thought about him because he was about to call, or did your sharing a thought make him call me?
Did my son give me the thought about your son?
Probably.
Did
yes.
I give it to him? Like, what's going on?
I think he gave it to you because you're constantly scanning Fred to see what he's going to do. So I would more suggest that it was that way than him getting it from you.
But for me, I don't know that changes my worldview, meaning I think like that's a coincidence. But what is coincidence to you? And what would an expanded definition of coincidence be if we were in more of a dropped in place?
Yeah, I like that. And there's a beautiful book, and I don't think there's only one now, but I think it's called Synchronicities and Coincidences. And there is types of them. I feel like we can almost expect them backwards, or I don't know, analyze, allow them to be meaningful when we analyze our life path backwards or situation backwards. But the more we are open to say, and this is again, going back to Aikido or Hapkido, which is a similar approach, is that when we are open to options, we can see several paths. So it's like standing on a crossing. And then we are perceptive to the next clue, that almost like a shortcut to whatever we want it to be. So it's having an intention, having a plan, doing an action, but not being set on the path. And then that coincidence happens, which allows us to say, I feel like it's the universe, playing to see if we are watching. This is my my take on it, and I don't have other words for it to explain it. But to me, synchronicity is so like a coincidence. It's almost a discounting of taking the power out of it. But synchronicity to me is that things come synchronized with, I guess, with our vibration, if you wish, with our expectation, with our mood, with our tone, with our perception, and then something opens up in the field. This doesn't necessarily explains, the children calling and us knowing, but we are thinking of them in a sense that, I don't know, we had a closer proximity. And if you wish, if there was an electromagnetic fine-tuning, maybe it's like, quantum particles.
You're being appropriately evasive, but I want to emphasize, you just mentioned a field, right?
Yes,
you
absolutely.
just mentioned thought having power, right, outside of it existing in a localized place, namely, this is what I'm thinking, right? What is that implication? And, don't be afraid to go there, because Jonathan goes there all the time and I try and follow him. What is the implication if thought is something that exists in a field?
Yeah, so I don't have scientific explanation for it. So I can only talk about from experience and observation. And that's why I feel that our experience and applied research, which is what I'm interested in, is through observation, making a connection and allowing us to learn from it without explaining it too much. Because once we start explaining, we're losing the ability, because our mind starts to doubt that it's not possible. So I allow to say, well, when you last time were, observing instruments, or when you were last time, looking this way, but felt it that way, how did that feel? And, what action happened? So, and then bringing that into training situation and to construct similar possibilities where the people can learn the internal signals that, you could call it synesthesia, because sometimes people don't realize that they're synesthetes, right? And there are like more than 150 combination of types of pairings that could happen.
More than 150? How?
Yeah, I don't know. But if you go to the website for synesthesia, they say it's 152 or something last time I looked of what that could be, because it's not just two, perceptual channels that they could mix. And if people have one type, they very likely to have other. So, for example, we have a friend who is an absolutely magnificent and talented composer. And so he can see music. So he sees shapes and he sees colors. And what's coming first, the music or colors or shapes as he's writing a piece? Can't be explained. Where does that come from?
Like, what is a symphony, right? Is it wavelengths? Is it like, what did it look like to Beethoven? As you're losing your hearing and you're a composer, can you still compose, right, without your hearing, if you are seeing the music as it's evolving? I appreciate, you acknowledging we don't have a scientific approach yet to be able to understand these things, but also like think about how many things that people thought, like germs, what, that doesn't exist, and like, yes it does, right? So there's so many things. What would that look like also if we do reach an ability to scientifically measure this kind of field, this difference in perception, it would be an enormous paradigm shift for the field of science in general.